All right. Hello, everyone. I'm just waiting to make sure that this is actually popping up on YouTube, and it looks like it is. I did a previous one that I did the whole video and realized that something happened and it wasn't recording. So I'm just going to get OBS out of the way. There we are. So you may notice that this is a slightly different setup than I normally have. I'm just visiting some family for the holidays. So again, I have kind of a very minimal setup. So I've got my big cans on because I have no speakers, just one monitor, a single microphone, just the bare minimum of what I need. But all that aside, let's just talk about the video. So this is going to be the first in a series of videos that I'm making today about several things you can do with the P5 Play library and sprites. This first one, we're going to be loading in some sprites, making them. That shouldn't be anything new if you've seen some of the previous videos I've put up here. And then we're also going to be basically being able to control how they move around the screen. So again, I'm just going to jump right into it. But before I do that, if you take a look down in the description below, you'll see a few things. One is a link to this sketch that I'm going to be building over the course of the video, so you can check that out yourself. I do want to point out that the P5 Play library is already loaded into this sketch. So if you're doing this on your own or using some other sketch as a starting place, you may need to add that. I have a link to a page to a textbook for this course that I teach also in the description, so you can find that, add it in. It's pretty straightforward. I've had several videos about that beforehand, so I'm not going to go through how to add that now. So let's just jump right into it. If you enjoy the video, you learned something, please feel free to give it a like or a subscribe. And if you have any questions, definitely put those in the comments. I love hearing those and responding to them ASAP. But yeah, let's stop all the general YouTube stuff and get into it. So I'm going to start this with just a single sprite here. Let my sprite. There we go. So we have to first, again, define the variable that will contain the sprite. The sprite has to have a name to refer to it by. So I do that globally. And then in the setup function of P5, I'll go in and I'll then define it as a sprite. So my sprite, if I can type, is going to be the result of the create sprite function. I haven't had my coffee today, but it's going to be the result of create sprite. The arguments for this are just like making a rectangle. And you'll see why in just a second, but you need the X position, the Y position, the width, and the height. So I'm going to say I'll have that right there. And if I were to run this, we actually won't see the sprite just yet, but we have made it. We have to add in an extra command to our draw function, and that is draw sprites. And then I don't have my auto refresh on, so let's just do that, fix my typo, and there it is. That's really hard to see, so I'm just gonna, there we go, change it until something a little bit easier pops up. So again, by default, until you add an image to your sprite, it's just going to be a kind of placeholder rectangle that, again, by default is always going to be a random color. You can make it a specific color if you want. You can just, after you make the sprite, say my sprite dot shape color, and you can assign it any color using RGB value. So I'm just going to make mine blue. 0 red, 0 green, 200 blue. There we go. There's our sprite. So now, notice I did that specifically to refresh it, but every time I refresh this code, it's always going to be that same shade. I like doing this when you start adding in multiple sprites just so you can tell them apart. But anyways, let's get into that. So this right here is a property of the sprite. Again, in the description, I have a link to some of the reference materials for sprites and P5 Play, so you can look through all the properties and methods. I've already done a video on that, so again, the short version of it is a property is something that makes the sprite what it is. This is the color of the sprite. The method is a small little function that the sprite can execute. So a method is something the sprite does. The property is something that makes it up. So if I were a sprite, my properties would be I'm a, 5'4" white guy with glasses. My methods would be, I am, executing, I am streaming this lesson, or, I am clapping my hands, stuff like that. Okay, so let's just hop back into it. Let's get this sprite to move around. There's a few different things we can do. I like putting a lot of this in the draw function so we can check and adapt it each time. So I'm going to start with my first one that I think is kind of useful right here. And we can say my sprite dot attraction point. Attraction point is a method. And again, we haven't given it the arguments yet, so that's why it's kind of freaking out a little bit. That you tell it how fast to move and where to move to. I think I've got that in the right order. We're going to find out. So I'm just going to start with, 2 pixels per frame. And we're going to move to mouse X, mouse Y. And, it's kind of working. It do be zooming. So what attraction point does is, again, it attracts it at a certain speed to a certain point. And this can be a specific point on the screen. It can be the location of something else. In this case, I'm using the mouse. These are going to be fairly basic examples, but you can, by all means, customize them however you want. So one thing I can do is, again, check to make sure that that's still running in YouTube, because I'm paranoid now. But I can move this here out of the draw function, and we can go down here into function mouse pressed and put that right there. So now the sprite doesn't move until I click the mouse, and it will move towards wherever my mouse is. So if I keep clicking this a lot, it'll kind of orbit the mouse from there. But you'll notice it's going to keep going forever and ever. So I'm going to add another property here, my sprite.friction. And I'm going to assign that 0.01. So, something pretty low. But now you see that the sprite slows down, and maybe I want that a little more. So now the sprite kind of slows down. So again, that's all friction does, is it applies, a fake, obviously this isn't a real item, but it applies the idea of friction where it will slow down. The value, 0 is no friction, 1 is so much friction the object will not move. So you want really, really small values for this property. I usually find somewhere between 0.01 and 0.1 are good for what I like to do. It's a fairly realistic representation, but you can fine tune it to whatever you need. But I'm going to implement this just so that way it's a little bit easier to control the sprites and is also a little bit more realistic. So again, I've just set this up right here in the mouse pressed. Oop, and now it kind of follows the sprite around, and now it'll actually follow the mouse a bit more. So that's one way you can move the sprite, just by, you can click and have it follow you. I'm sure people have played some games like that. What I'm going to build now is how I like to move things with the keyboard. Now, there are several ways you could go about doing this. And again, no one way is right or wrong. I like doing it in function key pressed, because then I can fine tune how far the sprite moves each time I press the key. and I don't run into an issue where if I press the key and hold it, the sprite just zooms off the screen. I can really fine tune it like that. But this will involve a little bit of work with the key code. So I'm going to say in the draw function console.log key code. So you'll notice down here in the console, we're getting the key code there. So this is all to help me figure out what keys I want to use to manipulate the sprite. If you're making a game, it's very common to use the W, A, S, and D keys, or sometimes the arrow keys. I'm going to use the W, A, S, and D on the left side of the keyboard. So to do that, what I'm going to start here is, let's see, let me click on the canvas and hit the W key. And you see now it's that's key number 87. So I can say if key code is equal to 87, I want my sprite to move up. So I can say, there's a few different ways to do this. So let's say my sprite dot set speed, let's say 3 pixels per frame, why not? At a direction of 270. So let's just test this to make sure I got it working right. Yes. Okay. So let me just break down what happened here. So again, the first one is the speed, just like before. That's the pixels per frame. You can specify that however you want. The directions may seem a little convoluted at first. And again, if you check out some of the pages in the textbook that I have linked in the description, this will break it down in a bit more detail. But essentially, it's measured in degrees, like of a circle. 0 degrees is horizontally to the right. So again, if my mouse was right here on the bottom of the screen, I would move it 0 degrees, it would move like this. If I moved it at 180 degrees, it would move the other way. So going up would be 270, going down would be 45. And then you can fine tune it anywhere within that, depending on what you need, but I'm going to go there. So I'm going to build these other ones up here. So let's go down with 83. Else if key code is equal to 83, we'll say my sprite dot set speed. I'm going to specifically set it at, again, 3. And I said down, so we're going to go at 45 degrees. Let me just tidy that up. And let's try it. So let me hit the up arrow, or the W key, I should say, to move up, and the S key. I got that wrong. It's not 45, it's 90. And I hit the S key, and I can now move it up and down on command, or I can click and make it move to my mouse. So I'm going to just real quickly add the next 2. So A is 65. Check. 68. All right. So now I've got this going to go up, down, left, and right. So now if I move with the W, A, S, and D keys on my keyboard, up, down, up, left, down, right. Now I can move my sprite however I want. One thing that's going to be useful, I'll get to it in a different video, but it's, oh no, I've lost my sprite. I don't know where it is on the screen. I can't get it back. So I always like to add some way to either keep the sprite from going off the screen which is what we'll do in the next video, or to bring it back. So to do that, we can just say else if let's not use 32. Let's use 20, not 27, 13. We'll say my sprite dot position dot x equals so you'll notice these are the same positions as when we created the sprite up on the beginning, and then we're talking specifically to the position property of my sprite. But the position property has two sub properties, that being the X and Y position. So we have to set the X position manually and the Y position manually. So now if I rerun this, I can move my sprite all around, but as soon as I hit the enter key, why didn't that work? Oh, I misspelled position. I think P-O-S-I-T-I-O-N, P-O-S-I-T-I-O-N. I think that was all I misspelled. There we go. So it will set that there. You'll notice that it still had the velocity from before we teleported it. So you could say my sprite dot velocity. And actually, I'm going to, I don't remember if this one's a method or a property. So P5 play. Oop, not I play. I want P5 play. There we are. I'm just going to pull that up. And again, this is all in the description down below, but velocity. So we can do it a few ways. We can set it just like the position, or we can set the velocity in each direction. So I'm just going to go in and say dot set velocity at 0 in each direction. So now we should, boom, the sprite will teleport and stop moving. Because again, the sprite will maintain its velocity, its inertia, in whatever direction. So that's a useful little trick. Okay, so got that there. Again, double checking that stream is still going because I'm just paranoid that it's going to stop now. But we can now move the sprite with the mouse and the keyboard. There are other things we can do to move the sprite, but those, in my experience, are some of the more common ones. To wrap this up, just as a last thing, I'll show you how you can click on the sprite and make it happen. So in order to do that, let's just comment this out where we can click and have the sprite follow it for now. And I'm going to go back up here to where we've made the sprite. So in order to have your sprite respond to being clicked on, it's fairly simple, but it has a few steps. So you have to first talk to the sprite. And then we're going to pull up on mouse pressed. And we're going to assign it to be a function. So, and did I mistype that? Need this. There we go. Yeah, I needed the parentheses there. So now, essentially, we are defining a custom function or a method for what we want to happen when we click on the sprite. And just whatever you type in the brackets here will be what happens. So we can say my sprite dot rotation speed equals 5. So I clicked on the sprite and now it is spinning. So the reason this works and we don't have to do math is because all sprites have a built-in kind of parameter or a hitbox. So it can know when the sprite is overlapping with another sprite or the mouse. So all that's happening is the mouse is going to say, oh, the mouse is over the sprite. And if the mouse gets clicked while that's happening, it's going to execute, in this case, a very basic function. This could be something, specific, or we could say, my life equals 200. I picked a random number. So now if I click this, boom, and it goes away. So it can be whatever you want. In this case, we started spinning the sprite, and then it got removed from the sketch. The sprite is dead. But it can be whatever. So the reason I wanted to end with that is because the next video I'm going to do is going to be talking about interactions with sprites and sprites. So when sprites interact with each other. This one was all about sprites interacting with the user. So again, you can do more than just moving the sprite around. You could set it up so sprites do certain things when certain keys are pressed. If you've ever played video games, maybe you have a jump button or a use an item or a punch button. You can set any key on the keyboard or the mouse to make your sprite do a specific thing. I just illustrated this with some of the more basic concepts right here. So again, now I can move my sprite around. I can jump it back to the middle if I need to. If I click on it, it will, I'll make this happen a little shorter. It will spin and then go away. So there's that. That's everything kind of in a nutshell. So I'm going to wrap this video up here. Again, if you learned something, you enjoyed the content, feel free to give it a like and subscribe. It does help out everything. If you have any questions or concerns, please put those in the comments. I love responding to those whenever I get the chance. And again, all the important information is down in the description below. So I'm going to wrap it up, and I'll be back shortly with another video about sprites interacting with other sprites. All right, so let me just pull this up so I can stop it, and I will see you all